Hello, and welcome back to Bombchu. I'm Austin.
And I'm Chris.
And today we'll be taking a look at the Humble Choice February 2021 bundle. We are still in the tail end of winter here in the Northern Hemisphere, so grab a hot beverage and get bundled up with a blanket as we dive in to explore this month's games. But hey, before you get too comfy, take a peek right below the video. If you see a big red button that says subscribe, that means you're not subscribed. And if you're not subscribed, you should be. A quick click really helps us grow. And hey, if you want to see some of our thoughts on the bundle early, go follow us at Bombchu TV over on Twitch. We stream some of the games while we record footage for these reviews, as well as some other fun stuff. Okay, annoying YouTube stuff over. We apologize for this interruption to your chill time. This month's Humble Original is Co-Open, a first-person shopping game, kind of. Your grandmother walks you to the store and tells you to do the shopping by yourself this time. She gives you a card with her phone number and says, "Peace out." Now, you can finish the game immediately by grabbing some items and heading to the checkout counter, but as it turns out, there are a ton of places to explore, with more unique items to pick up if you so choose. Some places are cool, some are a little creepy, and some are just plain weird. There's a lot to explore, and when you're satisfied with what you've seen and collected, you can head right back to the checkout counter and head home with Grandma while she judges you based on what you picked up. It's a good fit for a Humble Original. It's a weird and interesting concept. I kind of wish there was more of a result with the items I was finding. Like a couple of kids lost their ball, and I found it, but there seemed to be no way to get them to acknowledge it. This one really wasn't my cup of tea. Not that I even like tea. You know what? I'm changing it. This one wasn't really my can of soda. But if you like exploring interesting little worlds for the sake of it, do check this one out. Boomerang FU is a local multiplayer combat game where everyone plays as an item of food. You can dash, you can slash, and you can throw your boomerang. Throwing your boomerang leaves you without a weapon and vulnerable, especially if it doesn't make it back to you, but you can hold the throw button if you lose it to attract it back to you, especially when your enemies aren't paying close attention. You can also pick up power-ups which do things like provide shields, make your boomerang explosive, etc. There are 3 game modes: Free-for-all, Team Battle, and Golden Boomerang. Free-for-all rewards points for every kill you get, Team Battle grants points to the last team left alive, and Golden Boomerang tasks you with trying to get and hold on to the Golden Boomerang long enough to win a round. It's, pretty basic. I mean, there are some cute death animations, like look at how the milk spills out when you slice the carton in half. But when I think about having people over, man, remember when you used to be able to do that safely? I can't really picture my friends wanting to play this for long. Reviews on Steam seem to disagree with me, so if it looks like something you could have fun with, you probably will. Keep in mind, there's no online multiplayer, so if you want to play over the internet, you'll have to use Steam Remote Play or something similar.
Iris and the Giant is a roguelike deck-building card game from developer Louis Rigaud and released in February of 2020. You play as the titular Iris, a young girl who struggles with anxiety and depression. The story is minimal and simple, told mostly through short and to-the-point vignettes. We accompany Iris as she journeys across the River Styx, although instead of a border between the living and the dead, it serves as a border between the real world and Iris's imagination. Gameplay is fairly straightforward as far as deck building games go. You have a deck of cards that you can add to through various means as you play, including opening chests and stealing from enemies. However, once a card is used, it doesn't get added back to your deck, and is instead gone forever. If you run out of cards, or if you run out of life from enemy attacks, your run is over. There is a variety of cards available to use, and they have some interesting synergy between them that helps to add some layers of strategy to the often chaotic nature of the gameplay. You can also level up from defeating enemies and gathering crystals, as well as from defeating specific powerful enemies that appear on some levels. Leveling up will add some new abilities to specific card types or the player in general, such as allowing you to use multiple arrow shot cards in one turn or increasing your maximum HP. As you defeat enemies, you'll progress through different levels or floors, which are randomized as far as the enemies and rewards that they contain. One of the more interesting things you can come across are memories, which will reveal a small moment from Iris's life in the real world, but more importantly, give you bonuses that you can enable before you begin a run. You can also find imaginary friends, which, after completing a specific kind of challenge during a run, will also allow you to enable permanent bonus upgrades. These two elements really help the replayability of the game, and allows players who aren't the greatest at the game to still make progress and give them a helping hand along the way. Iris the Giant isn't the deepest or most complex deck-building card game out there, despite what it may sound like when I describe some of the systems at play. This isn't a bad thing, though. Sometimes you just want to play a game that you can kick back and play without working your brain too hard, all while still having a good time and making progress. Iris and the Giant is exactly that. It's not Slay the Spire, but for those times when you just want to get a quick run in and enjoy the scenery, it's absolutely perfect. Lovecraft's Untold Stories is an action roguelite from developer Blinny Games and released in January of 2019. You take control of one of 5 different characters as you explore the world of H.P. Lovecraft, fight monsters across various stages, and eventually attempt to confront the old ones themselves. Each character has a unique playstyle and approach to combat, so there should be a character type out there for everyone, at least once you actually unlock the other characters, that is. At the start, you'll be using the Private Detective, a classic archetype for a Lovecraft story. You'll be exploring a series of stages, each centered around a Lovecraftian-style theme and setting. For example, the first stage I played had me exploring a gigantic mansion, while the next stage had me going through some kind of twisted medical facility, complete with occult science experiments and demented creatures that once were possibly human. These stages are roguelike in nature, so while the themes and settings will stay familiar, the specific layouts will be different each time. Gameplay is very arcade-like, with you moving with the left stick and firing your weapon or main attack in any direction with the right stick, similar to a twin-stick shooter. You also have other abilities available depending on the character you choose, with the detective, for example, being able to throw dynamite and other explosives at enemies. Along the way, you'll find various items that will help you on your journey. Some will be as simple as a medkit to restore health, while others will offer you protection or help to restore your sanity. Yes, this is a game set in the Lovecraft universe, so not only will you be monitoring your health to keep from dying, but your sanity as well. Interacting with different objects in the environment, falling victim to traps, and witnessing horrible creatures and events can cause your health to fall as well as your sanity. If either drops too low, you're dead and your run is over. Well, not exactly over. Lovecraft's Untold Story isn't as punishing as most roguelikes, as you're offered the ability to restart from the beginning of the current stage, only losing your progress for that specific stage in terms of items, power-ups, and information gathered. This ends up making the game much less stressful to play than you might expect, although it does make things feel a bit too easy at the end of the day, at least on the normal difficulty setting. Once you finish a stage, you'll end up in a safe room of sorts. Here you can go over any information and lore you might have gathered about the old ones, as well as drop off items into a safe box, which you can access across all characters during any run that reaches the safe room. While I usually love the Lovecraft setting and characters, there's something about the way it's implemented in this game that just doesn't feel quite right. All the pieces are there for sure, but they're not really arranged with any level of finesse or care. There's all kinds of references, both obscure and mainstream, but they're tossed about with the randomness of someone who has probably read a few Lovecraft short stories, but got most of this information from a deep dive on a wiki. The end result is a lot of flash with no real substance. However, the gameplay itself is very solid, and even though the subject matter is more shallow than I would have preferred, it's hard to deny the simple pleasure of blasting cult members and old gods with a shotgun. If you like old school arcade-style action games, and especially if you have an appreciation for Lovecraft, you'll most likely get enough enjoyment out of Lovecraft's Untold Stories to justify taking up one of your picks. Werewolf the Apocalypse: Heart of the Forest is a visual novel RPG developed by Different Tales and released in October of 2020. Heart of the Forest takes place in the World of Darkness tabletop RPG series, so it's set in the same sort of universe as Vampire the Masquerade. Heart of the Forest puts you in control of Maya, an American woman of Polish descent. You've been experiencing weird recurring nightmares involving an ancient forest, wolves, and your personal connection to this place. You and your friend Anya decide to travel to Poland to check out the last remaining primeval or old-growth forest there, known as the Białowieża Forest. Also, quick thank you to the game for providing a pronunciation guide for the name of the forest, which I'm probably still butchering. Anyway, after traveling there, your journey begins, as you investigate the town, local areas, and the forest itself in search of answers. If you watch my reviews of the 2 Vampire the Masquerade visual novels that have been included in Humble Choice recently, you'll know a little bit about what to expect when it comes to the gameplay and presentation, but there's also a surprising amount of differences between the games that keep this one feeling fresh and unique. You'll still be doing a lot of reading, with mostly still images with slight animation to help bring them to life and keep things interesting as you go. As you progress through the story, you'll be presented with branching decisions to make, both in terms of dialogue and action. However, Heart of the Forest features a much more robust trait and stat system that will affect what your options are, as well as the success of any given choice. Your character traits include stats like how brave, inspiring, spiritual, and analytical you are, and they seem to affect a lot of the flavor and details of the text and your speech. You also have more active stats of rage, willpower, and health. Rage will influence your actions, especially during confrontations, both physical and conversational, and can be raised or lowered by taking different approaches to tough situations. Your willpower is like your mental health, and can drop when you come to a dissatisfying conclusion to a question or mystery, and will go up when you start to find more revealing clues and details. Your main health is pretty straightforward, and will go down when you take physical damage during events. All three of these stats majorly influence the options available to you, and possibly result in your downfall and the end of your story. These variety of stats, personality traits, and options available really help elevate Heart of the Forest above the standard bar for visual novels. Of course, since it is still a visual novel at the end of the day, all of this is really meaningless if the writing isn't up to par. Luckily, the writing and general story for Heart of the Forest is fantastic. The writers at Different Tales definitely deserve a lot of credit for crafting such an engaging story, and I felt myself getting lost in the world of Werewolf the Apocalypse almost immediately. Heart of the Forest does so much to stand out amongst its peers in the visual novel genre. This game takes everything I loved about those previous Vampire the Masquerade visual novels and turns it up to 11. Playing Heart of the Forest made me feel like I was experiencing the best tabletop RPG session I've ever been a part of, with the story feeling very personal to the character I was shaping and defining as I played. I think everyone out there should give this game a chance, even if this usually isn't your genre of choice. That's how confident I am everyone out there will enjoy it, or at least get a kick out of the story. Valfaris is a 2D action platformer from developer Steel Mantis and released in October of 2019. Valfaris places you in control of Therion, out on a quest to retake the titular planet from his evil father, Vral. After crashing your wolf ship, which, big thumbs up on that name and design for his ship by the way, you're thrust straight into the action. Valfaris plays like a modern take on Contra. You can shoot, swing your melee weapon, block shots with the shield, and fire a special sub-weapon. As you progress through stages, you'll be killing a lot of enemies, with some platforming and minor puzzle solving thrown in to mix things up, as well as collecting upgrade materials and new weapons along the way. The variety of weapons are pretty interesting, at least from what I've seen so far, although I did find myself sticking to the starting blaster for most of my playtime, as the upgraded version with the spread shot seemed very powerful. Enemies are tough, but they never feel overly difficult to beat, and I haven't yet encountered any majorly annoying bullet sponges so far. Your health can drop fast if you're overwhelmed or not paying attention, and death will happen quite a bit. Luckily, the checkpoints you're able to activate seem to be plentiful, and even though they require a collectible item to use, I never found myself coming across a checkpoint and not being able to use it. While the gameplay is very solid, it's the audio and visual side of things that really tip Valfaris over the top into amazing for me. It's like someone made a Contra game out of the movie Heavy Metal, and it's an aesthetic that I fell in love with almost instantly. Watching Therion grab a power-up and begin headbanging made me laugh out loud every time, and the little details like enemies being cut in half and their legs continuing to stumble around added a very special heavy metal flair to the whole experience. The soundtrack for Valfaris is also worth noting, as it's a great classic metal sound that isn't overbearing or grating to listen to for any length of time. Former Celtic Frost guitarist Kurt Victor Bryant provided the music, and it fits the visual style absolutely perfectly. This music is definitely going into one of my playlists for future use. Overall, Valfaris is such an amazing game. The gameplay is tightly balanced, and feels like the best parts of the entire Contra series mashed together and improved upon. The music is metal AF, and I had to fight the urge to bang my head along to it while playing. All of this is wrapped up in a heavy metal inspired visual style that makes me want to keep playing just to see what kind of environments and enemies they throw at me next. I definitely recommend everyone check out Valfaris, and I personally can't wait to play more.
Train Station Renovation is a mundane cleaning work simulator. Now, don't take that to mean I think cleaning work simulators are bad. I quite enjoy viscera cleanup detail, but a lot can go wrong with this type of game. So, what's the deal here? Well, instead of cleaning up a bloody mess, or flipping a house, this game is all about restoring train stations. Why train stations? Great question, I honestly don't know. You'll need to clean up trash, which can earn you money if you separate your plastics, metals, glass, and cardboard. You'll also be sweeping, dusting, demolishing broken furniture and structures, fixing electronics, and all sorts of other tasks. To help you find what you need to do, you have a progress bar marking off how much of the restoration is complete, as well as a scanner you can activate to highlight nearby problems and give you a count of exactly what needs doing. You also have a set of minimum requirements to complete before you can finish a job, though going above and beyond will reward you with stars that you can use to upgrade your tools. It's fun, for me at least. I like occasionally playing a game where I can turn off my brain and feel like I'm accomplishing something good. I should probably spend that time cleaning my own house, but damn it, gamification is fun. It also helps that this game has pretty chill music, and thankfully, as far as I've seen, no super wonky physics. My only real beef with this game is the main menu and hub, I guess I would call it. The menu is on a computer inside the office where you take jobs, and it looks awful, super blurry. And this is the first thing you see when you boot up the game. I get it, it's running on the computer inside the game, but barf, for real. Get rid of that, or find a way to make it look right. Also, there's a side room where you can play with model trains, although the interaction points are really small and hard to find, and it's especially confusing when the train controls pop up the moment that you step into the room, even though you don't have a train out yet. Still, the core gameplay is fun. If you're a fan of Viscera Cleanup Detail or House Flipper, definitely check this one out.
The Wild 8 is a survival game from developer Fantastic and released in October of 2019. The Wild 8 starts you out as a survivor of a plane crash, tasked with surviving the cold and wintry wilderness, either alone or with friends in online multiplayer. Every staple of the survival genre is here, from gathering resources by clicking on stuff, crafting new and improved stuff with the other stuff you gathered, leveling up to unlock new stuff to craft, and on and on and on ad infinitum. To be fair, there are a few things that help the Wild 8 to stand out just a little bit. The visual aesthetic of a winter setting are nice to look at, and help create a very isolating atmosphere that isn't the same jungle or forest look a lot of survival games seem to go for. The music is also pretty nice, creating a somber but slightly unsettling atmosphere. There's also a quest system, although it doesn't seem to be all that well implemented. However, the Wild 8 is just so damn simplistic and boring that it's never actually fun to play. While I'm sure fans of the survival genre get some kind of enjoyment out of managing their meters and crafting to scrape by for another night, I just don't get the appeal. It's also worth noting that even if you are a fan of the genre, the Wild 8 might be something you'll want to steer clear of anyway, as it seems that the game has been abandoned by the developers. There are multiple Steam reviews and comments online elsewhere that mention the game having multiple bugs, glitches, and unfinished quests, and that the developers have not issued an update for the game in over a year. Even the developers managed to lose interest in the Wild 8. That's how mediocre and forgettable this game is. If that doesn't say everything that needs to be said, well, I guess you could try out the game for yourself then.
Trine 4 is a 2.5D co-op puzzle platformer. If you didn't play Trine 1, 2, and 3, no worries, you can start here without any issue. Chris and I played this in Unlimited mode, which allows for up to 4 players and puts no restrictions on which characters you can be, though there is a Classic mode that limits the game to 3 players and doesn't allow more than one of each character to be out at a time. Unlimited mode was very fun for us, and we got to come up with some creative solutions that involved using the same character at the same time. Speaking of, let's break down the characters. You have a wizard who can summon blocks and move objects with telekinesis. There's also a knight who has a melee attack, a reflective shield that can double as a platform, and a really strong stomp that can break weak flooring or send something, or someone, flying if they're on the other side of a seesaw. Finally, there's the archer. She can, of course, shoot arrows, but she also has a rope, which can be used to grapple, pull, and connect objects, or even form a bridge when kept taut. You'll have to use all 3 to make your way through each level, and in especially interesting ways to find all the secrets. Chris and I had some very satisfying moments coming up with solutions, and switching between characters is a breeze. We both felt pretty meh on the story, but the gameplay is so darn good and smooth that I think we're both itching to come back to it as soon as possible. Moving Out is a local co-op moving simulator with over-the-top physics and a focus on comedy. Your moving company has to get people's stuff moved. Period. Just gotta move it, who cares if it's broken? You'll be breaking windows for shortcuts, throwing crap onto the truck, and causing a huge mess to try and get a good time. A lot of objects can be moved alone, but some need to be carried by 2 people. And of course, they're usually awkwardly sized or shaped to cause problems when you're trying to go out of small doors or fit them onto a tightly packed truck, so yelling is to be expected. It has a lot that reminds me of Overcooked, and me and my wife got into the same mindset, wanting to go for the gold medal, trying to strategize shortcuts, and trying to communicate effectively while the clock is ticking and someone's doing something wrong. We only played some of the simpler levels at the beginning, but having seen some of what's ahead, just like Overcooked, the levels get ridiculous. Sadly, no online multiplayer for this one, so you'll need someone close by or to use a remote play option. Here's hoping it really follows in the footsteps of Overcooked and we get moving out too, with full online multiplayer someday.
Endless Space 2 is a turn-based 4X strategy game from developer Amplitude Studios and released in May of 2017. Endless Space 2 follows the typical 4X path of gameplay, having players pick a race and attempting to explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate their way across a map, competing with other AI or human-controlled races along the way. The game is set in a very visually interesting sci-fi world, and tasks you with attempting to explore and colonize the galaxy. Each playable race has a distinct look and flavor to them, immediately making your choices stand out amongst each other. Each race also features a fairly unique style of gameplay, with them all having certain strengths that point them towards a specific playstyle or victory condition. Endless Space 2 has a wonderful aesthetic, both in its visual and audio design, and makes you want to just wander around the map and various menus even, taking it all in as you do. However, that's kind of where my enjoyment with this game ended. Endless Space 2 suffers in the same way that many 4X games do, and that's with the glut of information available quickly overwhelming newcomers to the series. At first, I was presented with a variety of options for the tutorial presented to me in-game. Being a Civilization series veteran, I selected the option that implied I was familiar with 4X games in general, but not necessarily Endless Space. However, upon starting the game, I was lost almost immediately. Although I know the basics of a 4X game, trying to figure out where to find the familiar options hidden in an unfamiliar UI and system was almost impossible. The problem is, even if you select the most basic level of tutorial as your starting point, you're instead just flooded with information that is going to be mostly glanced over at best, but only once you know how the systems work and what information is important on a turn-by-turn basis. Endless Space 2 walks you through all of this information, without really bothering to point out what you're actually going to need to know in order to get through turns in this game, and what you might want to know and consider optional, once you feel comfortable getting into the nitty-gritty details. You know, I used to think I was really into the 4X style of games, but the more of these I come across through Humble, the more I'm starting to think I only like Sid Meier and the Civilization series specifically. Either that or most of the 4X games coming to Humble Choice are just not that good. Endless Space 2 does a lot from a visual and world design standpoint to reel people into their world, but the onboarding process for new players just isn't as refined and streamlined as I'd like it to be. If you're a hardcore 4X fan, there seems to be a lot of really great stuff under the hood here, but for more casual 4X fans like myself, as well as anyone who's just not a fan of the genre, don't feel bad for skipping over Endless Space 2.
Valkyria Chronicles 4 is a turn-based action strategy RPG set on a fictional continent during a time reminiscent of World War II. Does this sound familiar? Yeah, when I covered the original Valkyria Chronicles a few months ago for the Humble Monthly 5-year anniversary, that's pretty much exactly what we got. And that makes sense, as this is a sequel in the same series. However, having played the original very recently, I noticed these games are extremely similar. Like it's a new story, but the gameplay is almost exactly the same, with some little tweaks here and there, like a new class of soldier. I don't really have a lot to add, so this will largely be the same thoughts I gave a few months ago. War has broken out between 2 countries, and despite the pencil-on-paper anime aesthetic, the horrors of war give you a reality check very quickly. Battles play out like so. You get a top-down view of the map, seeing your units and enemy units that are currently visible to your units. You use command points to select one of your units and start the action phase. You can freely run around until you run out of energy, or feel you're in a good position to fire on an enemy, at which point you can pull out your gun and aim down your sights, pausing the action so you can line up your shot. Your shots can go anywhere within the circle of the reticle, so if your enemy isn't taking up most of the circle, expect some of your shots to miss. It's all random, unfortunately. After you take a shot at the enemy, they will get to counterattack, so hopefully you're shooting from behind cover. You use all your command points, and then the enemy gets to move their soldiers around, and all this plays out in reverse. Your units will automatically shoot anyone they see moving, and if one of your units is attacked, they will counterattack. The concept of being able to freely run and aim your gun in a turn-based strategy game was pretty novel in 2008 when the original game launched on PS3. But 13 years later, I find myself wanting skill shots to matter more and less reliance on RNG. But I guess that's really part of the strategy. If you aren't close enough to fill up enough of your reticle, that character needs to get closer. I do think skill shots would be fun though. Cutscenes fare better this time around, fitting in better with the in-game graphics a lot more than the original. Graphics look fine during gameplay, nothing to write home about for a modern day game, but it matches the style of the first game quite well. If you love the first game, well, here's a lot more of it. If you've never played a game in the series, not to worry. This is a standalone story that can be played without having played any of the others, which is good, because 2 and 3 were never released on anything other than the PSP, and 3 was never released outside of Japan. If you're craving a tactical RPG with a touch of action and a focus on story, this one is worth giving a try. Outward is an open-world survival action RPG with co-op. And hey, it goes online, and split-screen, so that's cool. On paper and in pictures, this game looks like it would be really cool, especially with full-on co-op, and doubly since the survival aspect isn't too obvious. However, once I started playing, it was anything but fun for me. After getting equipped and leaving town to make some money to pay off my debts, Chris and I managed to kill a couple of chickens, and then got absolutely destroyed by some hyenas. We decided to take a different route and got destroyed. It turns out this game is pretty darn difficult. The survival elements of the game barely even came up because it was hard to survive combat long enough to get hungry or thirsty. Controls are pretty confusing at first, with things like dodge being mapped to left bumper. Speaking of which, dodging with a backpack on prompts you with a vague warning? I think. Which also tells you how to take off the backpack. I'm not sure if I'm damaging the pack or what. One of the more interesting parts of the game is that depending on where or how you die, different things will happen. Dying out in the field resulted in being brought back to town by a good Samaritan. However, dying in a bandit fort resulted in Chris and myself being thrown in prison and having all of our stuff taken. We had to sneak out, which was easier said than done. When playing in co-op, exiting a zone requires both players to exit together. While waiting for another player, you are frozen at the door while enemies are free to wail on you. This game was pretty brutal for us, and while I did enjoy laughing at the misery Chris and I experienced together, I don't think I'm interested in playing any further, and it seems like this is really a game you'll either love or hate, without much of a spectrum in between.
So overall, how was this month's bundle? Well, at first glance, I was not looking forward to this one much at all. There were a lot of couch co-op games, and almost nothing that I had heard of before outside of Trine. However, despite a couple of mediocre to terrible games like Endless Space 2 or The Wild 8, I found myself having a lot of fun with the games on offer this month. Not only are there multiple games that I'm chomping at the bit to go finish once I'm done with this review, but they cover a wide variety of genres as well, giving me something new to play for whatever mood I happen to be in when I'm choosing a game. Hell, this month even managed to give me some puzzle games that I'm looking forward to playing more of, and that's a pretty impressive feat if you're familiar with my genre preferences.
There were a lot of co-op and multiplayer games this month, and I think that was Humble's subtle way of theming this month's bundle around Valentine's Day, having games to play with your sweetheart on the couch, as well as games to play with your buds online if you see it more as Singles Awareness Day. Train Station Renovation was a nice surprise for me, and I'm excited to play more Moving Out with my wife, more Trine 4 with Chris, and I'm really eager to try out Valfaris. All these games together would cost about $340 at full price, and here's a price breakdown for each game.
Finally, we'd like to give a huge shout out and thank you to Michael Slater, Blake Harms, and all of our other glorious patrons over on Patreon. Your continued support means the world to us, and helps make videos like this one possible. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.